Good morning, Magic. I'm Gavin Verhey from Wizards of the Coast, and today we have a very special guest on the show. Coming in from Play Design and also the Core Set 2021 team, we've got Jadine Klomparens. How's it going, Jadine?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me.
So tell us about your background a little bit and what'd you do before you came to Wizards?
Before I got here, I was a competitive Magic player, wrote articles, thought a lot about Magic strategy, played as much as I could, that kind of thing. I got brought on to the Play Design team, balancing formats, making sure they're fun, that kind of stuff.
So right now, what timeline are you most testing cards from? What area of the future?
We are, roughly speaking, like a little more than a year in the future at any time. So right now we're kind of working on the spring, summer, fall sets of next year.
How much do you take what's happening right now in the real world when it comes to format into account when working on these upcoming formats?
As much as we can, which is sometimes not as much as we would like, but like seeing what the strong cards are as played in the real world is definitely something we react to as much in files that we can still change as we can. We'll rebuild a bunch of FFL decks based on how the real world has played these cards. The FFL is the Future League. Essentially, it's where we play standard environments in the future. We have a set environment internally at any time, the standard that we are currently testing that the FFL plays.
And what does kind of the playtesting experience look like at the beginning of the set?
So at the beginning, we are just trying to make sure all the themes kind of work, that they have enough cards. Because of how the art timings work, we don't get to create new cards very easily, so we kind of have to do a lot of work at the beginning to be like, okay, does this deck have all the cards it needs?
Can you talk more about how art impacts cards? Because this is something that I think not a lot of people know about.
One of the big ones we talk about is flying. It's really obvious from art when a creature flies. So once art is figured out on a card for a creature and it flies, it's going to need to fly. And if we want to give another creature flying that already has art, we can't anymore because the art doesn't have it fly. Size is impacted a lot, even just by like creative. Like the creature is this creature type. That creature type cannot be smaller than this or bigger than this. No 1/1 dragons, no 6/6 insects, that kind of thing. Maybe there are 6/6 insects. I'm not actually that sure about that one.
You'd been a competitive player and you came into Wizards. How did your mindset have to change? What did you have to get used to?
The biggest difference is that cards change, which, sounds really obvious, but like they change so much, and it's just you can't get used to a static environment. Something you knew yesterday is like not true later yesterday, let alone tomorrow. It's just things are really fast paced and you got to keep up with it.
Yeah, sometimes I know you'll be playing a game and it'll be like, oh, actually, this does a different thing now.
Yeah, or sometimes you play a card once, get through a turn with it, and it's like, okay, so that's obviously wrong, right? We'll change it later, but let's just start playing it differently.
I was brought on to do development work when I first joined Wizards, which is basically what Play Design does now. And I remember it always felt weird that I spent like hours building some really strong deck, and then my reward for building this like really broken deck or whatever would be your deck is no longer playable. So it's like you work really hard to make sure that some of the decks you build don't actually get played.
Yep. My most successful decks I don't play a game with, just like build it and be like, okay, look at this, come on, let's move on.
And how many decks would you say that you build in a given week, or does it really change from week to week?
The range is like 4 to 12 or so, I would say. Just like, most weeks build at least a deck a day.
Were there any big surprises about working at Wizards?
I guess mostly just like how nice everyone is and supportive the environment is, and how easy it is to like talk about ideas and get things moving.
The first set you had to work on at Wizards was Core Set 2021, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I got into Wizards, like a week later, they're like, okay, you're on the M21 set design team for a couple months, go have fun.
And so what was joining into that like? I mean, that was your first ever draft in the building. So you walked in, you sit down, you opened up your packs of Core Set 2021. What was that like?
Yeah, it was wild. It was a core set, so that was good. Like the cards are a little simpler and just like easier to process, and just doing M21, basically blind my first time. It was just a lot to take in.
How was balancing limited? What were some of the big tweaks you made or things that you were really careful of while designing the limited format?
I guess the biggest thing I remember changing late in like the balance portion of the draft format was the black-red archetype, which is sacrifice. Used to have a larger emphasis on like steal your stuff and sacrifice it. Like the active treason variant was at common, and it was just so swingy, and like we just couldn't get it done. It was like kind of cool, but mostly the games were too strong. But I think the deck ended up in a pretty cool place.
Were there any cards that you in particular had a hand in that you're really proud of, or that you're, happy that you brought into life as the first set you got to work on?
Tempered Veteran was kind of, well, my first card design that has made it into a Magic set, but also just kind of like a design lesson. I remember being in a room with Adam Prozac, the lead, on like the first homework assignment he gave for the M21 set. And he's like, okay, so we need an uncommon for the green-white counters theme. And I go, all right, so how about a 2-drop that can put a counter on things that have counters? And he goes, great. Cards like that, I like to give them an activation that's more expensive to do the thing itself. And that's basically just the entirety of how Tempered Veteran got to exactly where it is.
What do you think the most discussed card was? Was it Teferi, or was there any other card that was talked about over and over and over again?
It was definitely Teferi. Some others were, maybe close, but I think Teferi might be the most discussed card that I have ever worked on. The just paradigm shift of having planeswalkers be able to activate on either turn was just a lot. Finding abilities that weren't too board complex to deal with. We played with versions of Teferi that were so mind-numbingly complex. I remember an FFL meeting where I sat down and was just like, okay, so I played Teferi. I tanked for 3 minutes on how to increase my win percentage in this game by 0.5%. I had a blast. We absolutely cannot print this card like this.
That's a really great note, that sometimes the thing that's right for you, the super competitive player, is not the best thing for the Magic card. And that's the thing you have to kind of distance yourself from.
Absolutely.
Do you remember any of the different designs you all tried out?
There was this thing where once we decided we wanted to do the Teferi can be used on either turn, there was a thing for a little bit where we exiled cards under it, and then you could get them back later in some weird way, and that was just really complicated to think about.
So besides Teferi, then, what are some of the others that were talked about a ton and playtested a ton?
Elder Gargaroth was another one that kind of we put some work into and played a bunch. Adam Prozac had a goal of making Baneslayer Angel type cards for lots of colors. That's how Terror of the Peaks and Elder Gargaroth came into play. These giant threats that, don't do anything if your opponent has an answer right away, but can really take over the game if they do not.
Core Set 2021 has a ton of really high-profile reprints, everything from Azusa to Ugin. What was the rationale for choosing these cards, and how many did you look at? What were some of the thoughts behind there?
We wanted cards that would be cool, that people would have fond memories of, and that hopefully for most of them would play a little differently than maybe they did in their first standard environment. One of the coolest things Magic does is context is super important, and cards can change based on the cards that surround them. So we didn't want any of the cards to be, the exactly same experience that they were the first time around.
So with Scavenging Ooze, as an example, that's a great reprint. What's something different this time around than when it showed up before that you're excited about?
So Scavenging Ooze, there's a couple of things going on. First, in the set, there's some synergies kind of built into Scavenging Ooze that weren't necessarily there before. If you're interested in +1/+1 counters, M21 has Conclave Mentor. You can play those together and get a lot more bang out of your Scavenging Ooze than maybe you were the first time around. Second, the cards that Scavenging Ooze is fighting have changed. It's got the same role as an anti-graveyard thing, but now you get to exile cards like Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath.
Were there any other awesome reprints that you tried out and didn't quite make it, or things that you were kind of flip-flopping between for this set?
We thought about Cryptolith Rites for a little bit. That one was pretty close and could see something like that happening.
Speaking of reprints, a card which has drawn a lot of discussion is Ugin. This is a big deal reprint from Fate Reforged. How much work did you have on that card in particular, and how much did you try that out in decks?
Yeah, play design, thought a lot about Ugin, played it in a lot of different decks. It's definitely seeing a lot of thought and discussion among the community right now, and that was something we absolutely expected. Ugin was a big deal, had a lot of presence in its original format, and, hopefully it's fun this time around.
Yeah, and I'm sure you'll be keeping your eye on that one too, right?
Absolutely.
Moving on from the reprints to the new cards, what are some of the new cards that you enjoyed playing in the FFL the most?
I think Liliana, Waker of the Dead, was kind of a pet card of mine. I got to play that one in a lot of decks. I played a lot of Jund on the outside of Wizards, and just kind of that kind of design, and the Liliana Planeswalker in specific speaks to me. Also played with a lot of Terror of the Peaks. That card was pretty fun.
And were you using Terror in your Jund style decks, or as a curve topper and like a red aggressive deck?
Yeah, I did both of those, probably a few others. One of the most important things in play design is to try and not get trapped into thinking about a card in only one context. And even if you think it's going to be stronger in one context than another context, you have to try all of them because cards surprise you a lot.
Oh, that's really interesting. Are there any other truisms of play design that you feel like you're always thinking about or that are kind of mantras?
One of the things I think about a lot is that small changes matter so much. Kind of like, this card is too strong. I'm not sure really the best way to attack it, but it's kind of a problem. We need to do something. And somebody will be like, all right, so what if we just take a power off? And then you try it and it's like, oh, actually, that was a huge deal. It's doing all of these things I couldn't have thought about. The game's lasting another 2 turns. They have more chances to deal with it. And it's just, these small changes matter so much.
So of course there's sometimes things that are better than we think, but is there anything that you worked on that you're like, oh, you thought this was going to be an awesome card that didn't unfortunately quite bear out just because of how standard shook out?
Yeah, so the mutate plus +1/+1 counter synergy, you can see it in the real world right now with Stonecoil Serpent and Gemrazor to make like a very strong attacker very early in the game. That was something that we played a lot with and changed a lot of cards kind of around, trying to make sure that this would land in a good spot. I think it's hit in the real world like a little lower than it did kind of for us.
And finally, just to close it out, do you have any cards that are your favorite from the set that you would want to talk about or have a story about?
Yeah, I guess it's a tie between the Tempered Veteran and the Thieves Guild Enforcer. They're kind of both the first 2 cards that are like cards I designed more than FFL work of. It's hard to point at a card and be like, yeah, I changed that to a 2. It used to be something else, but now it's a 2. But those ones I had more of a hand in. Hope you all have a lot of fun with M21 and Jumpstart. The set's really cool. Had a lot of fun working on it, and I hope you enjoy playing with it.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I'll talk with you again on Friday. And in the meantime, may all of your Core Set 2021 cards be designed exactly as you hoped. You got this.